another exciting edition of Behind the Ballot. I'm your host, Jeff Waldorf, working with getvocal.com. So if you can sign up, you can, after the stream, go and interact with each other and talk about the subject that we're going to talk about today, which is the question that a lot of establishment media is asking: is Russia coming after our elections? So this is a bit of a controversial subject. So with me, I have Dan Spearin and Ron Placone. Dan Spearin, of course, former TYT network host, Canadian channel, and also does a lot of side projects now, and a lot of writing and things like that. And we also have, as I said, Ron Placone, TYT network host, writer as well, works in the Jimmy Dore Show very famously, and also does Aggressive Progressives. Welcome, Ron.
What up? Good to see everybody.
Good to see you too. It's been a minute.
Yeah, man.
And welcome back, Dan, as well.
Thank you.
All right.
This is like our own Hollywood Squares, kind of.
All right.
Everybody's in a block, and we're just.
It's fun.
It's like we're all on a new platform.
I know, right? It still reminds me of the old days.
A little bit.
But anyway, so there was allegedly some interference in the 2016 election by a certain country. Let's just call it Country R. Again, controversial subject. Now, there is, of course, the question of whether or not Country R will do the same thing in the elections. Now, what they're alleged to have done is to do interference through influencing social media, doing bot farms, and might have been involved in a little bit of email stealing. So again, that's alleged. There's a lot of intelligence agencies that believe that they were involved in these shady activities. And, you know, it really depends on if you can trust those intelligence agencies or not, which a lot of people do. Some people don't. So the real question here is, of course, are they coming back? If it happened in the first place, are they coming back? Okay. So I guess the question is, first, we'll go to Ron. Actually, Ron, I just wanted you to clarify to everybody what you think about the Russian investigation and really the Russian supposed interference in the 2016 election, what is dubbed as Russiagate, and you know, just kind of explain it to us, I guess.
Well, Jeff, I am a little bit tired of Russiagate. It's been going on for 2 years now, and the goalposts keep shifting. First, it was collusion. And when you asked what exactly Donald Trump did, you would say, well, what exactly did he do? You would get very intellectual answers from people. I got answers ranging from, come on, Ron, to, aren't you a patriot? So still didn't answer my initial question, but, you know, we're all left to wonder. Now the goalpost has been moved to interference, whatever exactly that is. I tweet about politics all the time. I guess I, too, am interfering in quote-unquote elections. When you look at these memes that were posted around the election time, they range from memes of Jesus arm wrestling Satan to Bernie Sanders with rainbow abs. Some of them were seen by as many
awesome, by the
way. No argument there. Some of them were seen by as many as 300 people. Some of them were posted after the election. And the whole thing didn't even really have a theme politically. So it kind of looks like they're just normal, everyday spammers. Now, as far as the whole thing with Trump being involved, we're still waiting for any evidence of that. And we've only seen negative impacts because of this. Because of Russiagate, the FBI and other intelligence agencies are overseeing social media more so than ever before. Because of Russiagate, independent media outlets, especially RT America, are under attack. We've never seen any positive effects from this for the most part. I mean, it is good that Trump's on his toes. And is Trump guilty of regular oligarch corruption? Absolutely. I don't think anyone would dispute that. All these indictments you mentioned, they're all on totally unrelated charges. They're on charges of money laundering. They're on charges of misappropriation of campaign funds. You're going to tell me a bunch of white-collar billionaires are also white-collar criminals? That is shocking. We certainly needed 2 years to uncover those gems. So until I see some evidence to the contrary, I'm still waiting and waiting and waiting. And in the meantime, here's a question I would pose to both you guys. If the Democrats are so convinced that, Trump is some Manchurian candidate and this and that, and I despise Trump just as much as everyone else. I think he's terrible. I think the good way to fight him is with actual opposing policy, not with a Russiagate narrative that's been going on 2 years and counting. But if he is such this Manchurian candidate, why aren't Democrats screaming that at the top of their lungs right now with everything that's going on in the Supreme Court? If ever there was a time to use that political football, that's the time to do it, and they're not doing it. And again, for the people that are Russiagate skeptics, like myself and others, this makes it all the more frustrating. If ever there was a time to use the political football of Russiagate, that's it, and they're not. Why aren't they?
Dan, I saw you shaking your head a couple of times. Weigh in.
I just, listen, there's now that Ron has set up a much larger topic. So let me try to take what Ron said and where I disagree. I think that it's a false framing of the subject to say that Russia meddled versus Trump is a Manchurian candidate. There is a middle ground there where Russia 100% interfered in your election. We have proof of these things, but it's not that they interfered in terms of they set up the Manchurian candidate. I get that that's become the political narrative in your country, but we do have globally reasons to have issues with Russia. For example, in 2014, they interfered with the Ukrainian election, and that was also through cyber espionage. You can take cyber espionage seriously. You can believe that you should look into it. You should believe it's wrong when Trump gets rid of the head of your cyber espionage in government, where you're looking into that. He goes, that's probably not that important. Those things should concern you. Digital literacy can concern you. It doesn't mean it's a slippery slope. I think what's happened in your sphere of the web is that somehow people who were on the left of the center Democrats, center-left Democrats to left Democrats, are arguing now within their party about the best way to look after Trump. And the media cycle has put a lot of stress on the talking point that somehow Trump was elected by Russia. But I think it's a problem, and it's not a great framing of the issue to talk about how Russia is innocent and everything's fine just because they didn't literally install a president into your country. There are troubling things, whether it's Illinois or whether it's fake news or whether it's situations where they can find out user and voters information such as social security numbers, et cetera, et cetera. There's varying scales of this problem. I understand that, as I said, it's not Manchurian candidate level, but I don't think that means, well, then there's nothing here.
Do you want to respond to that, Ron?
Yeah, I don't think, I never said Russia is an innocent party. And that's another way people move the goalposts where they say well, Putin's a bad guy. Yeah, no one's disputing that Putin's a bad guy. That's not really the conversation here. You yourself.
But both of you, from the get-go, kind of rolled your eyes at Russia having an involvement in your election, but it's
because it's absolutely absurd.
But it's not. It's proven that it happened.
Can I finish? It's absolutely absurd to think that a handful of Facebook memes and a handful of Twitter bots, that most of who have less followers than all of us, not even all of us combined, all of us as individuals, somehow brought down one of the most expensive campaigns in the history of American politics. I'm sorry, that is absurd.
But
that
wait,
is
that's
absolutely
not what I'm talking
absurd.
about. That's not what I'm talking about. No
Then
one has
what
said.
are you talking about? You're saying there's these reasons for concerns. You're not saying specifically what they are. You're saying that they commit cyber espionage. Yes, they have done typical things like that. They have troll farms. That's going on.
Right.
You know who else had a troll farm? Hillary Clinton. This stuff goes on constantly. And I think that people are taking something, and I'm not saying it's good. Of course it's bad. It's not desirable.
Okay.
But it's something that's business as usual. People are blowing it up to the point where it's dominated our news cycle for 2 years. It's a scapegoat. And that's what we need in the United States. And when I say we, I mean the status quo. They need a scapegoat because otherwise they would have to take a look within. And more people, because of Bernie Sanders, are realizing how rigged our system is.
So there are a lot of great points on both sides here that I'm seeing. For one, I don't believe Dan is arguing that this is not being used by certain people in the Democratic establishment to cover for what is in fact an embarrassing loss. But of course, there is also, and I think I've seen a lot of circumstantial evidence, at least, that there was some sort of like what you call it, interference. Now, the effect of that, I mean, I don't think we can really argue that there wasn't interference, but the argument some seem to be having is the effect of that interference. Now, I believe, along with Ron, that it didn't have actually much of an impact. And this is where you and I might differ, Dan, because basically what they did is they were against one of the most unpopular, actually two of the most unpopular candidates in this election cycle. And it was fairly easy, I believe, to capitalize on that. There was so much disinterest in this election on both sides, I think. And it was very, very easy to put out fake stories and do troll bots and create fake movements that might have influenced a few people here and there. And with elections, when you have lower turnout, when you dissuade a certain number of people to the polls, that can make a difference. And look, you know what also can make a difference is not going to Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. That also made a bigger difference, I believe. But I think it also had an impact.
Can I say something? Sure. I'm going to paraphrase Noam Chomsky here, and I'm even going to add the sarcasm that he did first. If you're worried about the integrity of our pristine elections, Russia should be among the last places you're looking. And that's the issue here. Russia is such a small bullet point, comparatively speaking, to everything that goes on. Even just this past week in New York, all of a sudden, a bunch of people were purged from the voter polls randomly because Cynthia Nixon was making a bit of a splash. Over in Kansas, I believe it was the 4th district, it might have been the 3rd, but the progressive guy that going up against the establishment, he was winning. Then all of a sudden there was some weird glitch, and then he wasn't winning anymore.
So let me add to that. Chris Kobach, the creator of Interstate Crosscheck, which is definitely a way to purge voter rolls of minorities, people of color. Also, because of that glitch, or after that glitch, gained quite a considerable lead and ended up winning his election. That's a little strange. So yeah, the you point out some pretty valid points, Ron.
Go ahead, Dan. Respond to that. You're shaking your head.
Well, because we
literally say what you want to say.
We went from the one side that's against, I assume, your side, which is, I assume, centrist Democrats. They are kind of conspiracy theorists.
No, centrist Democrats are not my side.
All right. Well, we went from being against this broad sort of sweeping narrative to both of you just insinuated conspiracy theories on voting elections.
Russiagate's a conspiracy theory. Russiagate is a conspiracy theory.
Sure, which you were against, which is my point. But then 5 seconds ago, when it was candidates that you liked and there's a glitch, now we're saying that those elections were inaccurate? Is that what we're saying? Like, that was you guys just.
I'm saying those are greater causes for concern than Russiagate.
Why?
Yes, I am saying those are because there's way more circumstantial evidence. All of a sudden, someone's ahead. All of a sudden, there's some random glitch and they're not ahead anymore. I mean, we have our elections are so dishonest on so many levels. We needed paper ballots only yesterday. We needed to get rid of the electoral college yesterday. We needed to get rid of superdelegates yesterday. We needed to get rid of gerrymandering yesterday. We have all these factors going on in our elections where the people do not get a say at all. And we get it shoved down our throats by a corporate media who doesn't give a shit about the people. That Russiagate is something we're supposed to worry about.
Listen, hold on. First of all, you know about a lot of these things and a lot of things we're talking about because of the corporate media. So
that's
not
true.
Shit.
That's not
shit on really smart journalists that work. Just because they work within corporate media does not mean they're not good professional journalists. There's a lot of great journalism happening in your country right now. And this broad sweeping narrative of the corporate media gets really old really fast because it doesn't mean anything.
So does Russiagate. And okay, yeah, there are some gems in the corporate media that I'll give you that. There are some diamonds in the rough. But is a lot of this stuff being reported by the corporate media as a whole? No, not really. It's independent journalists. It's Nomiki Konst turning on her iPhone and saying, hey, I got purged from the rolls, and then other people picking it up and putting articles out about it and then sharing it through the blogosphere, and then the corporate media pretty much has to pick up on it. So are there diamonds in the rough? Sure, I'll concede to you there. There's a few independent journalists. There's some people employed by the corporate media doing good stuff. But as a whole, the narrative is very, very, very filtered.
Okay, so I don't want to go down a different topic tonight. So I'm pro good journalism, and I don't think the corporate media is the complete enemy of the people. I don't think a lot of reporters are looking and going like, how do we serve our corporate masters? Muhahaha. But sure. The issue for me here is, once again, we don't have to frame is Russia meddling in the same breath as Russia installed your president. There are different ways to look at this, but and that's what I think is really problematic in what you're trying to do is you're trying to politicize.
What am I trying to do?
Well, you're trying to politicize espionage of different countries because you feel it's a tactic of the center Democrat to stifle what you see as a new movement of progressive voters or independent folks or whatever. I don't know what team, because you just said you weren't part of the blue wave team, but whatever you want to call that, I think that you're trying to politicize it where both of you, like, there's facts that they interfered. Now, are there facts that the Kremlin installed a president? No, of course not. But should it concern you that most of your people running in this election don't have solid cybersecurity? Sure. Should it concern you that America, that Russia was able to steal 500,000 voter information and security numbers? Yeah, it should concern you that those things happened. And should you be worried about it? Yes. And should we be concerned about all the things that Ron brought up? 100%. And that's why Jeff and I have been talking about those things for the last month on here. I think this is one of the final topics of Jeff's voter series. But this is an issue. It doesn't have to be the main issue if that's not your main issue. But I just think it's dangerous to dismiss it because it doesn't fit with your political belief.
Go ahead, Jeff. I'm waiting for you.
Oh, I'm not sure really what I have to say on that. As I said before, I think that there's a lot of.
Let me ask you this then, Dan. I'll jump in then. Let me ask you this. So, out of all the things I mentioned, if you had to rank them, what would you rank them? Because you kind of just moved the goalpost again into the susceptibility of our voting process. You can roll your eyes all you want, but you kind of just moved it into the susceptibility of our voting machines and stuff like that, which I'm with you 100% there. They're incredibly susceptible. Like I said, we needed paper ballots last week. We also need alternative voting methods, but that's kind of a different issue. So where would you rank Russiagate and all that? Would you say that, Russiagate's the biggest issue? Next, we have to worry about the susceptibility of our elections. Next, we have to worry about election fraud. Next, we have to worry about whatever else. Or would you say all these things are of more significant weight than Russiagate? What I'm saying is all of these other things we've talked about, literally every other issue, is way more significant than Russiagate. Way more. It's so far down the list. And if that was reflected in the media cycle, I wouldn't really care that much. But what you have going on here is you have these people, and I'm one of them, that can't believe Donald Trump is president of the United States. They can't believe it. And I feel that. I mean, he is absolutely disgusting. He is repulsive beyond comprehension. But he is a symptom of a much bigger problem. People are trying to ignore that, and instead they're looking for a scapegoat out of it. And that's what Russiagate has become. So I would argue to you that over-amplifying this is way more dangerous than maybe dismissing it more than one should. And I don't think I'm dismissing it more than one should. I feel like I'm accurately assessing it. And until there's any evidence to the contrary, that's where I'm at.
All right, let me ask you this, because maybe I've misunderstood your points. When you keep saying alleged and you keep saying evidence, what evidence are you speaking of that doesn't exist? What don't you think has been proven?
We don't have any evidence of quote unquote collusion. We don't have that. We don't have any evidence, and you pointed that out already.
Sure. But
and what I'm saying is,
but we do have evidence of trying to meddle in the election. Can we agree on that?
If by meddle you mean they have a troll farm and they posted memes, sure. Yeah.
No, they've stolen information of voters.
I mean, to my understanding, that has not been proven without a doubt either.
It has. Like, I don't know listen, it's hard for me because I'm the Canadian in the group, so I don't know. I understand I'm not living with your media problems, so to be really blunt with you, I really can't speak to your nightly news and that what specifically is going on that you feel is over amplifying an issue or not. I mean, that could be the way it is in America right now.
Just check out Rachel Maddow, check out Chris. I mean, any of that stuff that they talk about. I mean, there's some polls out there that I believe Harvard or Princeton did it, and they measured like how much something is talked about versus how much people care. And Russiagate is talked about over 75% of the time. And it's an important issue to about 6% of the population. And I think a lot of these people, their hearts are in the right place. Their head is not. Yeah, it's despicable that Trump is president, but to kind of look at this foreign adversary as some kind of scapegoat, I'm not saying they're good. I'm not saying they didn't interfere at all. And I know the voting tampering, to my knowledge, the verdicts are still out there because there's some conflicting stuff on both sides of the coin via the intelligence agencies. A good guy to look into regarding that is Aaron Matei over at The Real News. He breaks up a lot of that stuff. But, I mean, it's just, and it's been 2 years, Dan, 2 years of just nonstop. It's getting comically bad at this point. And if you look at some of these articles, I mean, there's the Jimmy Dore Show. I know you're not a fan, Dan, but the Jimmy Dore Show, we've dissected a ton of these articles where, you know, they talk about, hey, we got collusion in the headline. And then you go about 6 or 7 paragraphs down and they got nothing. It was clickbait, Dan, and nothing more. You want to talk about fake news? Holy shit.
Well, we definitely disagree. I don't disagree with you that media hypes sexy narratives. So yeah, like I've done multiple television series and digital shows about how our media is not serving us in the best way that it could. I think that the problem that I have with this narrative is that you have other people outside of this political conversation. And, you know, like, it sort of reminds me of what the Republicans are trying to do this week with Me Too, where we're trying to turn Me Too into a villain because it helps us in a current political situation. And a lot of these topics that we're talking about are just more important than political spheres. And like espionage / digital literacy / having to be worried about how our modern elections are run and how we interact with platforms all the time and how we're being manipulated. It's part of a digital literacy that we're not very good at right now, and I think we should be better. And why I guess I push back so hard is I really do feel this push and like a drumbeat coming from independent media in a lot of cases that this shouldn't be anything we should be worrying about, and that anyone who is worrying about it is somehow silly to think anything of it. And I just don't believe that's true. Like Microsoft a few weeks ago reported that like 6 Russian-launched websites were mirroring your think tanks and your Senate sites. And like anything that hurts a democracy or hurts people voting, it doesn't matter if it's I'm not speaking to the amplification of what's getting covered and what's not getting covered. Ron might be completely right on that. no longer spend my time in a Media Matters style paying attention to
let
what
me jump in
each
on
network
that
does.
real quick here, and just
but
buttress.
the bigger problem is that these things are happening. So that's what I have a concern of. Is they are happening. Mm-hmm. They should be of concern.
The reason you're getting such a pushback from independent media, Dan, and maybe you're not aware of this, but it's because we are seeing the cyclical effects of it because they are coming down on us as a result. Adpocalypse is connected to Russiagate. The stifling of independent media, the throttling, is connected to Russiagate.
That's 100% untrue.
That is 100% true. That is 100%
Adpocalypse
true.
is
How do you feel the contrary? All of a sudden, they decided stuff was not advertiser friendly. All of a sudden, they couldn't have an exempt list for news and politics channels. You really believe it's all coincidence, Dan?
Yes. I don't. It's not.
That takes courage.
It's not a coincidence. It's just you're wrong. It's the reason why Adpocalypse happened in Google and what's going on YouTube is 100% to do with the same things we've been dealing with since the beginning of time, which is brands have pull. Brands are constantly afraid to get their brand hurt. It is no different than any other thing going back to television or radio. What happened was brands were not paying attention to what was going on. And when The Independent launched in the UK, they launched this news story where they found Pepsi and Johnson & Johnson in front of like ISIS recruit videos. Brands lost their minds and everybody pulled out. And it became a sort of domino effect where no brand wanted to be the one left standing. Most of those brands have put their money back in. What that has to do with is safe harbor in music and YouTube's direction of wanting to go to originals. I don't want to get down that rabbit hole because that's not what we're talking about. But to say that Adpocalypse is connected to Russiagate is just not accurate.
Now, it is a factor, Dan. Are the other things you brought up factors too? Yes. But to say that Russiagate has no place in everything that went down, I think is 100% false. And if you want to write it off, that's fine. But
it's just, I mean, when I left TYT Network, what I went to do was advocate to the government in Canada for digital creators and talk about what's going on behind these platforms. And I'm just telling you, like, that's not why Adpocalypse happened. I'm not saying, I think what's happening in America right now, that you guys are having this like really big media conversation about Donald Trump. And I do think that a lot of people are saying things in this politicized world. So it's like, Donald Trump can't be president. Where's my scapegoat? And I think there's a small percentage of people who are doing that. I also think that when you guys look at these issues, there's a lot of people that are trying to push back against what we have, which is not fact checking in media. What we have what digital has brought us is a lot of sloppy journalism. And was there sloppy journalism before? Sure, 100%. But I think what citizens, whether you want to call them citizens or whether you want to call them media customers, are looking for are people that are fact-checking and being very concise about what they're talking about and being very specific to what they're looking for. I think a lot of your audience is looking for that. I think a lot of the audience that you're sort of deriding who would listen to mainstream media is also looking for that. And I think that a lot of mainstream sources are the reasons why we know what's wrong with Donald Trump and also the reason why we know what's happening with a lot of this cyber espionage stuff. So, I mean, like, The Guardian is mainstream media, yes?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's just like, depending on where you fall politically, I just think that we should look at these things because they are serious problems, whether you like, and I'm not trying to be a bad actor here. And Ron, I don't want to like, but I feel like, I don't know, maybe you've been having this debate and people automatically put you into the camp of like, you know, crazy third-party conspiracy theorist or something. I don't know, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is an important issue that shouldn't be dismissed. And Jeff wanted to talk about it today. And I wasn't trying to come at you from, this is the most important issue of our time. It's just that you guys out of the gate went to eye roll and being dismissive of things that have been proven by the press and by even corporate companies. Now, is the Kremlin directly involved in any of this? We don't have evidence of the Kremlin being involved in Trump being elected. But did the Kremlin and Russia's security apparatus try to get into various things in terms of what's going on in America during that election? Yeah, that happened. Should that concern you? Yes, that happened. Should Trump eliminate the post of White House cybersecurity coordinator? No, he should not. And those things are fine to bring up.
Okay. So now we've talked a lot about the problem, right? And there's a lot of different problems here that we've apparently identified. One of them, going to Ron, media saturation of, look, sometimes I do have the misfortune of watching some mainstream media and look.
Wait, what does that mean? Wait, stop. I'm not
okay, we're talking like, what is mainstream?
I love how Dan called out the eye rolling. Meanwhile, he's done most of it this entire time.
Okay, what do I mean by mainstream, right? Mainstream is just what most people watch, right? I mean, you can't argue that Fox News is the most watched channel in the country. Sure. They are considered mainstream, right? MSNBC and CNN are also mainstream. I'm just talking numbers, right?
Okay.
So these mainstream news outlets do a lot of coverage on this issue. MSNBC does a lot of coverage on this issue, and sometimes that does take the oxygen out of the room. Fox News does the opposite, pushing back on MSNBC's and CNN's coverage. Again, taking some of the oxygen out of the room for other important issues. So we saw that during the presidential primaries when Bernie Sanders was not covered, when he was gaining traction. And I think that would be a great time for him to be covered. And I remember the reports from Ed Schultz, the late Ed Schultz, who did note that Phil Griffin did not want me to cover Bernie Sanders, did not want me to cover these rallies. And so we have seen them prioritize Donald Trump. We have seen in the WikiLeaks emails that were proven those were stolen emails, which I do believe Russia, the Russian security apparatus, stole the emails, gave them to WikiLeaks.
There's no evidence of that. There's no evidence of that. No, I'm saying there's no evidence of that.
And how do we find the evidence? We would investigate that.
Well, but there's no evidence. WikiLeaks claims it wasn't Russia, although they also are clear
and I can understand why. And I'm not saying like it's 100% one way or another. I'm just saying that what I believe.
Yeah, you believe
and where they came from
enough times
doesn't really. The thing is, where they came from doesn't really concern me as much as what was in it. What were in those emails, and what we had found out in those emails. And so that's more of my issue, but that's a personal preference that I can take. And you can, I mean, it's definitely an issue when organizations, whether it be Saudi Arabia, Israel, or whatever country you want to pick out, China, does cyber attacks and is able to compromise servers through, spear phishing techniques, which was what is alleged to have been used against the DNC. That is a little bit of an issue. And so I think what we need to focus on here is solutions to some of these problems, whether you believe that they're the most important issue or if they're not necessarily the most important issue, but are nonetheless still an issue, right? Ron, you alluded to some of them earlier, which would be paper ballots, right?
So, yeah, I mean, until we find something better, we got to go to paper ballots. I mean, it's just, and there's a number of reasons for that. And is interference from foreign adversaries on that list? Yes, I just think it's significantly further down that list than either of you guys, and that's fine.
And the reason, the thing that I'm asking is
because you talk about. Well, I think paper ballots is one. And I think, I mean, again, you brought up the WikiLeaks emails. You said I was more focused with the content of those emails. I agree with you 100%. I was too. Those emails showed us that the DNC is a cheating organization that has no integrity whatsoever, and is completely morally bankrupt, something we already knew, but it was just sort of confirmed for us. As far as our midterms go, I don't know. I think results are going to be a little more mixed than people think. I think we are going to see some things flip because of Trump fatigue. That's typically what happens in a midterm in the United States all the time. So we are going to see some of that. You know, I think we are seeing some progressive victories to be excited about. Sure. But I think it's a really long road. And I think at the end of the day, what we're really dealing with here is it's been shown to us that the status quo is more corrupt than we realized, more broken than we realized. And here in the United States, we have two choices. We have a fringe right-wing party and a center right-wing party. And if that reflected all the people that lived here, that would be one thing. But it doesn't. The campaign trail on 2016 showed us it doesn't. That's not the people that live here. 60% of the country wants single-payer healthcare. The healthcare system that your country takes for granted, Dan. We don't have that here. People want to end fracking. People want jobs and living wages. And people want to be able to go to college without being in insurmountable debt for the rest of their frickin' lives. The status quo is broken beyond repair. And Russiagate has been serving as a convenient scapegoat to not look at that. So by over-amplifying the issue, as the corporate media does, and again, I'm not pointing my finger at every single journalist employed by them, but as a whole, to paint a broad brushstroke just for simplicity's sake, that's what's going on. It's not really that much more than that.
All right, Dan, response and maybe some solutions?
So to start with solutions, I think that you have to actually take this problem seriously. So I think that you do have to have somebody that's looking into cyber security and espionage at the White House level. I think on the state level, the actual individual representatives need to take their own cybersecurity a lot more seriously. I think that from the public's level, digital media literacy is something that the education systems need. So to understand fake news, I think the wrong framing of the issue of fake news or memes, it's really easy to make fun of a silly meme and think it has no reflection on how people interact with it, but it really does. And we've always been manipulated by images, whether it's, going back to Leni Riefenstahl and Hitler, and, or whether it comes to small little things like Pepsi Cola and Coca-Cola spending so much money on advertising. Like, these things matter, and how people interact with them matters. Now, it's never about, does that mean a large portion of the population is going to wake up in a cartoon state like a zombie and wander through the halls going, Trump? It means that the people who are already radicalized, if you will, for lack of a better term, or people who are just already in that media bubble, can become more and more extreme. And we saw that when we tried to have, America especially has had a few examples of this, but recently in Canada, I had a mass shooting here, and the memes went out that the shooter was Muslim, and this farm of news we call Nectarine up here has put an article out with some information about how that shooting went down, but they left out the information that it had nothing to do with Islam. The shooter's computer had nothing to do with any of that on it, but the memes and things keep coming out. So can another country exploit those things and cause division among us? Yeah, they really can. And I think it's actually very important that we do take a look at those things, because you're right, it's not happening 100% because of foreign country interference. There were kids in Canada that created fake news sites that became very, very profitable during your election cycle, exploiting right-wing propaganda and news. There's kids out east doing it in different countries. There was a lot of stories about things like that. So are these things happening on mass scale? Yeah, they are. But it's still an important thing to look at. So media literacy is number one. Also, Facebook and social media companies like Twitter and YouTube / Google or Alphabet, they have to be held accountable, and they have to be able to put these things in place to look at how we can best make sure that information is flagged. So there's a really great institute in Britain that's looking at all these fake news things. And one of the things they've come up with that's really cool is an algorithm that actually checks politicians' facts in real time. So if somebody's speaking, so like, for example, Trump, there's a reporter named Daniel Dale who's working for the Toronto Star who does great work fact-checking Trump on Twitter anytime he speaks. So if you were just looking at Daniel Dale, but there's an algorithm that's going to be able to do that soon. And it's going to make these things a little easier for people to take a look at. Now, going back to what we can do in terms of phishing schemes and spear phishing and all those things. I think that the number one thing is that people have to become a lot more savvy to it. If you looked at, I'll give you a really good example of this just from the bigger picture. If you watch 5 seconds of the Mark Zuckerberg testimony, we are so screwed dealing with these companies because our representation does not have a clue. One of my biggest problems with your 2016 election was that it was the best of the baby boom, and none of them had an understanding of what was going on digitally speaking. So the Clinton email scandal for me wasn't so much the emails, what was in the emails, it was the fact she didn't really know how to use email. And like, that's a scary problem when it comes to the future of the country. So what we're trying to get to here for me when it comes to prevention of this stuff, it has a lot to do with literacy, and it has a lot to do with taking it more seriously. And like, that's why I pushed back so hard tonight when we're like, oh, it didn't install anything and there's all these other problems. I don't think you're dealing with any of these problems well, to be honest with you. We've talked about voter suppression the last month here. You know, we talked about gerrymandering here as well on this program. So like, a lot of these issues, you know, I'm 100% with Ron that like, it needs to be attacked yesterday. So I just don't think that means that the Russian / global, what we're having is a concentration of media online. So I don't really have the same, I don't think, disdain for the mainstream media that a lot of independent journalism on YouTube has. Because I believe if you tear everything down...
Let me tell you something. If you lived here, you might change your mind.
I know exactly what you're saying, and if we went on if you and I sat down on a story by story basis, I bet you I would agree with you like 8 times out of 10. My problem is that the mass, and this is something that we rethought doing our show, even making fun of the news. The problem is when people don't trust anything, it never goes in a good direction for the things that I think that you're fighting for, which is a lot of like, basically get America closer to Canada in terms of policy. And I mean, that is something that I think they win when we tear everything down. And so my problem with the sort of concept of like, let's tear this stuff down because it's broken is what are you replacing it with? And until recently, that movement didn't have a lot of answers to that. But I think that the new wave of candidates, we talked about this the last few weeks, do have answers for this. So to sum up, what I'm basically trying to say is that I think that these things are important. I don't think your citizenry has a very good handle on what's fake and what isn't journalism. I don't think a lot of your citizenry is informed as it could be. There's a ton of reasons why, but when all of this is a perfect storm for interference from foreign entities. Now, it doesn't mean we have to go Michael Moore full Canadian bacon and say that Russia did it and, you know, Canada's going to attack us. And like, it's not a recipe for paranoia, but it is something that I think is a red flag that you aren't ready for these problems. You have not put an infrastructure in to deal with 21st century issues. And by the way, China is a bigger problem for all of these issues than Russia, but that's a whole other conversation. So, I mean, if we took this away from electoral systems and talked about corporate problems, it's a whole other issue too.
Well, and Dan, I think that's where you and I have some of our disagreements, because to respond directly to something you said, I would make the argument that the issue is it has become that recipe for paranoia. I would argue that has already happened. And that's kind of what I see as the problem with all this. And again, you know, maybe, I mean, I think I'm giving it its due diligence, but if I'm not, it's because this has been rammed down our throat for 2 frickin' years. And so I think it has been, I mean, people have accused Black Lives Matter of being infiltrated by Russia. They said that DAPL, that was Russia messing around. Those are ridiculous accusations. There's no merit in them. Sure. And people, you know, and you know, part of the frustration of the corporate media, they have had misstep after misstep on this, Dan, and they have no one's faced any consequence. I mean, there were those 3 people at CNN that lost their jobs, but for the most part, no one's faced any consequence. I mean, people have gone on MSNBC. They claim that Jill Stein. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, let me finish your point, because that's what I was going to ask you. Could you think of a specific example where someone should have lost their job?
I mean, Malcolm Nance on MSNBC. Now, he's just a contributor. I don't know his actual employment situation, if he gets paid as a contractor or what, so I can't speak job specific. But, I mean, he said that Jill Stein is funded by the Kremlin because she has a show on RT. That is just simply false. She doesn't. She didn't. All you need to do is go on their website to look up that information. That's defamation.
You've brought up RT a couple times. I will let you get back to your point. I'm not trying to derail your point.
No, that's okay.
But I'm curious about, why do you feel RT is a good actor in terms of, like, they have problematic reporting. Can we agree on that?
I think the RT America Bureau does a pretty good job. Now, can I speak for every single? Can I speak for international as well? Not so much. I'm not as fluent in that. But I think RT America, which and maybe I should have specified that was more what I was referring to.
Okay.
And that's another thing on a personal level here. I know people that are intelligent people say to me to my face that some of my friends and colleagues in comedy are Russian spies. That has happened. I never, in my wildest dreams, thought anything like that would happen. So what we're saying is
Lee Camp is not a Russian spy.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, well, you'd be surprised. And maybe that's why I'm a little bit knee-jerky on this stuff, so I'll concede you there, Dan, because I know you don't fall into that camp. But what I am telling you is this is happening, and it might be louder than you realize. And that's why we see this cyclical problem, and that's why we get wary when people want to over-amplify this stuff. Is election security an issue? Abso-frickin-lutely. Is cybersecurity an issue? Of course. Should Donald Trump just dismiss everything? Of course not. But, to just put all the eggs in the Russia basket, it has dangerous side effects, and we've only seen those dangerous side effects.
There have been people on record, by the way, saying, just to get back to our original topic, and I appreciate Ron addressing those things for me. I think that your midterm elections are less in danger of Russian interference, because I would assume that the Russian interference that will happen is more interested in your 2020 your 2020 election. I do think that they will try to meddle, and just to speak to your Chomsky quotes and stuff, you do this to other countries, so it's
absolutely.
I'm not arguing that you don't. I'm just saying because it's happening all the time, and because that it is happening on minor levels and bigger levels, that all of these things are still a concern. So I won't speak to media amplification and what's right and wrong and who in your mainstream press you think are bad actors. But I will say that I don't think a lot of stuff on RT America is great. I think that the journalism skews heavily to Russia government. I think it's Fox News for Russia. That's just when I watch
on RT. What specifically?
A lot of the programming that speaks to going back to even the Olympics and the LGBT issues in Sochi. That network held a lot of water for everything's fine for gay people. So there's that's a specific. This is we covered that when we were on TYT networks. This isn't new. I'm just trying to give you something pre-Trump, because I know everything's gone political after Trump. But there's problems with that network in terms of its coverage. I mean, if you don't like MSNBC, I don't think you should love RT America. It's the same journalistic malpractice that's happening on the spheres.
Well, my only thing there is some of RT America just gets stuff pumped in from the international bureaus. So, I can't speak directly to what's what.
Okay, but isn't that sort of like what Fox News did, which was but our news shows are journalistic, but our opinion shows aren't. The network has a problem. I'm not saying, once again, that it's,
Again, there is a world of difference between there's some issues with that network and these American journalists working for an American bureau are spies. And that's what I'm pushing back against. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I know you're not suggesting that.
No, but to clarify my point, if I was working in journalism, I would not want you to be associated with RT. I'll put it that way. So I believe they hold a lot of water for the Kremlin. I see them as a Fox News of Russia. I don't feel that they are somebody who's neutral in any way, shape, or form, or following what we would like in journalism. There are things, of course, that come from some of those programs that are accurate and that we agree with on the left or in progressive West. And we would be yes, it is better if America does X. I'm just saying that if I was somebody in American media, whether I was a comedian or in the States, or whether I was a journalist in the States, I would not want my program on that network because I don't feel I don't feel that they deal with things in a fair manner.
Okay, I mean, I think the same can be said about MSNBC, CNN. I mean, when the FARA thing was enacted, which I was against, I thought that was really wrong. That was a thing that we had in the 40s to combat Nazis, and they put it on American bureaus in our country. And not just RT America, they put it on a Chinese outlet. It was a xenophobic action, and it was morally wrong. But, I said, you know what, if they're going to do that to these bureaus, then all of our corporate media should have to do the same thing. CNN should have to say who funds them. MSNBC should have to say who funds them. Fox News should have to say who funds them.
I really do think that, and this is what's so hard about everything, I think that it's up to the people watching, whether it's on digital looking at fake news or whether it's people watching their programs at home. It really is, buyer beware, for lack of a better term. It is on a lot of people to pay attention to what they're paying attention to. I do think, though, that there are certain networks that, when Jeff called Fox News mainstream media based on
viewership, basically.
I don't agree. That's my definition of mainstream media, personally. Canada and the rest of the world, we don't see Fox News as your mainstream media. We see it as a main factor in the problems of your mainstream opinion, but we don't see it as a mainstream. We see it as a propaganda network. And that's what other countries see Fox News as. So I get where you're coming from in saying that is a majority. That beats out, ratings-wise, their shows rule in ratings. So I totally get where you're coming from. But it's just if we're talking about news and media from a critique standpoint, I wouldn't that network wouldn't fall into mainstream coverage, and neither would RT for me. Your problems with CNN withstanding, they are down the middle when it comes to how news operates in the broad strokes. Now, are they down the middle politically speaking? No, of course not. But these things are, more closer to what we would call mainstream America audience. But it's pay attention. Pay attention, kids, is all I'm saying.
Solutions, because, I'm with you. There's so much going on. People don't know what to make sense of what.
Right.
As far as the solutions go, where I get a little wary, too, is this idea that we're going to trust Mark Zuckerberg and his friends to make administrative decisions and filtering fake news from us. I have problems with that too. What I think should happen is I think that networks the size of Facebook. Now, this doesn't need to be applied to all social media platforms because that's not realistic, but the size of Facebook, which at this point is pretty much commonplace. It is kind of the modern day electronic town square. They should have to become a public utility because it benefits the greater good. And they should have to follow free speech laws, meaning you can't censor somebody unless they have an actual free speech violation. I think that would kind of be the necessary first step that would kind of avoid unnecessary and overreaching censorship, which to me, overreaching censorship is more dangerous than fake news any day of the week.
I disagree with you, depending on what you're speaking. It's a really broad statement. I think that the amount of confusion in the conversation is hurting democracy in a big way, and not necessarily in the fact that it's swinging elections in the West, though it has swung elections other places. What we're looking for is it's radicalizing people in sects. It's a problem that you're seeing time and time again. And so there's a lot of issues that I don't want to umbrella this because I know Jeff's trying to keep us onto the thing. What I will speak to is what Ron said about free speech. The problem you have with this, Ron, is that Facebook is a global company, despite it being existing in the U.S., headquartered there. So you can do that, but my free speech laws aren't your free speech laws. And
that's true.
And this is the problem that they have when we're talking about all these platforms. So the EU has done a much better job of regulating Facebook. And so you're getting a different Facebook than I am, or that they are, I should say we are in North America, because Canada nor America hasn't really pushed back on things. So these are things we can do. And there are things we can do to these platforms to say, listen, pay better attention. The issue with America and why everyone drags their heels is that a user on Facebook is 4 times more valuable, and an American is 4 times more valuable than anywhere else in the world. So advertising money, and that's why fake news was so rampant from different places in the world, these farms, is because your audience, because of the mass amount of people and attention you have in your country, and of course Madison Avenue as well as Silicon Valley, you're just people, quote unquote, are more valuable than the rest of us. So there becomes a globalization and Americanization of digital audience because of this. And a lot of these things are becoming problematic for us Canadians and other citizens of the world, because you're getting preferential treatment in a lot of ways, but you're also shaping what we do and how we behave as online users. So about 5 years ago, I think I came on your YouTube channel and talked about the CBC and how that sort of kept us from non-craziness. Well, guess what? 5 years later, we're in some serious crazy because CBC has been sort of overtaken by a digital feed. And the digital feed of Canadians is a lot of fake news actors and a lot of, and let me know, I won't use a blanket term for fake news. A lot of right-wing media who are specifically targeting their audience, as well as fake bots and all these things we're talking about today, as well as people who just aren't informed, like your friend, who's sharing that piece of news or just hypothesizing on his long Facebook rant. So yes, the number one thing is I think digital media literacy and media literacy in general, Americans score very low in. A lot of countries in the world score very low, and that's just something that schools have to deal with. I think it's because it's becoming more important.
Well, I agree 100% with you there. I mean, I think that media literacy should be taught starting in first grade. But yeah, it should be taught in a classroom and with a critical lens that's fair. And
it doesn't even have to get political. You can really just teach kids how these things work from like
I'm with you. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I just, it's a weird kind of era we're entering because this is unforeseen territory. Like, this is new. The law has not really caught up to the issues we brought up today. And there's so many factors coming in from so many different places and so many ways to dissect it. And, we all see the same problems. Our priority lists are a little different, but we all see the same problems. And the thing that we also have to wrestle with is the technology isn't going to go away. So, it's here to stay. So we have to deal with it. And where I think you and I are butting heads a little bit too, is we're sort of having this Orwell versus Huxley argument where you're saying we're amusing ourselves to death. And I'm saying that's an issue, but an even scarier issue is the suppression of any type of dissent or anything like that. Neither one's good. They're both bad. Both of us are bringing up important issues. It's just, how do we find a balance where we kind of solve each without stepping on the other? And we're not going to answer that today. That's not an answerable question today, but that's really what we're dealing with.
I think there's an issue where the big issue you're going to see coming up, though, when you're talking about these platforms, when you're talking about how to solve them, is America's definition of free speech is far, far broader and more tolerant of hatred than other countries' definition of free speech. And so this is where things get into problematic areas, because if America had their way with free speech, 95% of these actors on Twitter and stuff would probably be allowed to keep their handles on YouTube and everything like that. And in different countries, like in Canada, different places, they would not. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we have it right, and I believe you have it wrong. And that's a longer debate for another day. But these are the issues that we're going to have to deal with. Is we're in a globalized world, and we're getting now. Do I really think corporations are going to carve all this up and geo-block everything and we're going to get back to square one? Yeah, I kind of do, just because money's money. But I do think that we have to look at these issues as citizens and figure out how we solve them from a literacy standpoint. Because just to be clear from this debate tonight, it's really not about the media, folks in the media, and I think a lot of these debates often frame fake news, the problem as I said, everyone's going to sort of get into a zombie state and vote for one candidate. We think of things like the Manchurian Candidate and pop culture. What the real issue is actual voter apathy and people stop caring about the system because things get so ugly. People just like, I want nothing to do with this. So whether it's 3,000 circles and arrows of Hillary Clinton is sick and that's a Hillary Clinton double and that nonsense, or whether it's just, Ron and a lot of the independent media thinking that certain issues like Russiagate are being overexposed for an agenda or just for ratings. All of these things make people go to sleep and make people walk away from the system. And I keep repeating this to you every day. You're really losing because people aren't participating. Like the progress is losing because there's not enough people participating. And so when Ron's like, what's your number one issue from earlier, rank them. My number one issue for people who would like to see more progressive ideals in America is you've got to vote. You've got to go out for the midterms, and you have to ignore a lot of this noise on the internet and look at your candidate, figure it out. And so that's where Russia stuff bothers me, because they have attempted to, mirror sites, and anything that makes voting more complicated or anything that makes democracy less accessible is a huge problem for me.
I agree with you 100%. I just think that on that list, you have voter suppression. You have the fact that people don't have much to vote for because of candidates being bought. I think that those are just a lot higher than what Russia's doing on the internet.
And I guess for me, it seems like I have a hard time ranking, I guess, these things, because I look at them as separate problems that all should be addressed. And I don't want to leave one out to solve the other when we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You see what I mean? And I think discussions like this that talk about all the different problems and try to see solutions and to see where we agree, that helps, because when we agree on a problem, we are more likely to actually work to solve it. And at the end of the day, I think that that's what we need to do, is to actually solve these problems. If that makes any sense.
Are we coming back next week with the topic, can people actually chew gum
and walk
at the same time? Because I think we could debate that too, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, I think we have one.
I've fucked it up a couple times in my life, so I would have to go out and do some trial and error.
But, swallow the gum, trip, fall in your face. That happens. But okay, so
yeah, sorry.
You guys got any final thoughts so we can wrap this up?
Go ahead,
No, I will say this. Listen, it's really hard for people, I think, in this era, because they're drowning in information and they're drowning in things that they don't really understand. So it's like, before you get to a lot of articles these days, you're like looking for the explainer article before you can read the second article that talks about the problem, because you feel like you're behind the 8 ball. And there's a lot of problems that immediately get a lot of attention, and then people are like, oh, maybe this wasn't the biggest deal. So fake news, for example, there's been a lot of studies since then that talked about a couple of things. One is status star, which we spoke about here in previous weeks. The other, though, is, for example, Hillary's email scandal got way overcovered. And that scandal, like Ron was talking about earlier, when it comes to your media, got so amplified that became kind of a running narrative. And there's a lot of issues with the new style of candidate, which is sort of running. There's a really interesting Adam Curtis documentary that people should take a look at, where it's talking about America and Russia and how these things work. And one of the things that I'm not saying, once again, to talk about that this is like Russia, it was a Trump surrogate or something, but Russia ran this really interesting campaign and media tactic, which is just blatantly blast out lies, because people will not be aware of what's true. And by the time they figure out what's going on, Karl Rove, the Republican, in America, who ran Bush's campaign, has famously said things like this too, which is like, by the time you figure out what we've lied about, we're on to the next lie. And so there's a lot of this sort of Machiavellian stuff in the ether. At the end of the day, though, our mainstream media does have to be more diligent than ever, and it does have to figure out what their, can there be some balance? And one of the things you should all think about, which I'm sure you won't, but is funding public television at a higher level, because when you have for-profit media, and I'm sorry, but I believe this is true for internet as well. You chase what gives you clicks, whether you are in a massive corporation or whether you are trying to make rent. It is very hard to look away from what pays your bills, depending on how big your bill is. So one of the solutions that we didn't bring up tonight that I think is seriously should be considered is what Ron talks about, public utility on the internet, but also with television. Like, there needs to be a public broadcaster. Like, we have the CBC America. The UK has the BBC 1, 2, and 3, and 4. They have one of the better ones, Danish television. You can go through the European countries, and a lot have them. And putting more money into that system, I think, and giving your citizens a place where they can go that isn't either funded by niche audiences that have pitchforks, and that also isn't funded by corporations who are looking to get their message out through media. So I think there's a lot to be said about public broadcasting.
Ron?
Yeah, I echo that we do need to rethink our media structure here in the United States. And that's why it's so easy to get so frustrated by our corporate media, because, the structure is really set up to fail. It's not a healthy structure for a democracy. And again, I'm not singling out every single journalist, like you pointed out, Dan, but I'm talking the structure as a whole. And a better publicly funded media similar to the CBC or the BBC, not to say those entities don't have their problems, they certainly do, but that would be a step in a much better direction for us. And I think that issues of media literacy are important, not just by not getting tricked by certain memes or anything like that, but also by paying attention and also recognizing a scapegoat when you see it. And we're dealing with these issues coming from all sides. I think that to better strengthen our elections, we need to have less voter suppression. We need to have paper ballots. We need to have, and we need to have a better structure where I also favor ranked choice voting and stuff like that. That's kind of, we can't get into that today. That's sort of a different topic. But in the short term, in the midterms, we need to make voting more accessible. One thing we also need to do in this country desperately, and I'm saying this to kind of step on my own toe, because this would hurt me and this would hurt Jeff and this would hurt you too, Dan, because you talk about American politics some, but we need to have shorter election seasons. Other countries laugh at us. It goes on and on and on. And this would hurt me as a content creator. This would hurt me, and it would hurt you, Jeff, and it would hurt you, Dan. But it would hurt the greater good, and it would help our country in the long run. So, I think a lot of these factors are at play, and I just kind of feel like getting back to the main question of today, I feel like Russia itself is just much lower on the list compared to all that. And that's why the Russiagate narrative, one of the reasons why it has been a frustrating one, even though there are some factors at play there.
Okay. So, I don't know. I think we reached a lot of consensus here today. I think we definitely explored the issues surrounding, the narrative and surrounding media and literacy and voting and suppression, all these different factors, which are very important to have a discussion about. So I want to thank both Ron and Dan for joining me and having this lively debate with each other as I sat and watched for the most part, because there's so many interesting things on both sides that, to sit and absorb. So I want to thank you guys for doing that and for talking about this issue. And, as far as I'm concerned, I agree with a lot of, what both of you have been saying tonight. And I thank you for the opportunity to, for you to share these thoughts with the audience.
Just to be clear, I can use this for my RT demo reel, right?
Yes. Go ahead.
Where does this air, by the way?
It's airing on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
And it's also airing on Get Vocal.
Oh, okay, cool, man.
And by the way, what's that?
Were we live, or what was were we on
YouTube?
Live.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool, man. How were our numbers?
Yeah. Pretty good. We got a lot of people chiming in, a lot of people watching. By the way, I think there's a super chat here. $2 for the debate from Canada. Thank you, Patrick Seguin. for tuning in and for using the super chat.
That's only like $1.40 American though, so I mean, don't get too excited.
Hey,
That's changing all the time, though. It's changing all the time.
It's
Buckle
nice.
in.
It's nice.
Thank you, though, to that
But
Canadian.
thank you. We appreciate that. All right. So those of you who are watching on Get Vocal or watching on YouTube and want to chime into your own discussion, just go to getvocal.com, sign up, and jump into a room and have another discussion like Ron and Dan had today. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for watching. And remember to get vocal. We'll see you guys next week.
Viral for Ron.
Are we off?